Music for me, like many others, can feel like the last vestige of freedom in a world of work, consume. The advances in home recording, simple online distribution have made creating and releasing music extremely accessible. But with the ubiquitous nature of music, tens of thousands of albums at one's fingertips with the aid of a smartphone and a streaming app, what value does music have for the masses that consume it? No longer is the band with stars in their eyes have to approach major labels on bended knee begging for a shot. They can now be their own distribution, PR, and label. But is the playing field truly equal? Before the pandemic, music venues were already shuttering at a rapid rate. This has only been exacerbated by the pandemic. With a convoluted rescue plan to attempt to not only save independent music venues, but attempt to save the jobs of millions now out of work, coupled with the fact that these same venues are fighting to stay alive against venture capital that was made even more stronger due to the original CARES Act, what will happen to live music in the COVID age and beyond? Like my good friend and YouTube host Justin Hunt says, I don't have the answers to these questions. But I enlisted a panel of music professionals and journalists that have been in the game from van tours to luxury buses to discuss. This is Revolution. And I am out.
All right, welcome to the show, everybody. Thank you very much for tuning in today. It's a special show. Pascual will not be with us today. He is actually back in the writing gym, as we've been calling it, working on his book that is not called Kill Whitey. It is unfortunately not called Kill Whitey. That being said, we're going to do a show today about the future of music, what it's going to look like. So I talk about this stuff kind of ad nauseum with friends at different points of the day when I get a minute, and sometimes I even talk about it on the show. But being that my co-host is not a musician, I figured I'd hit up all my musician friends. So if my volume is a little off, I apologize, guys. A monitor fell on my computer while I was doing the Ben Burgess show. So if you saw me on Ben Burgess show, I was not mad at him at all. A monitor literally fell on my computer, breaking it. So I just have a bunch of new shit and it's all fucked up. So let me introduce first and foremost a good friend of mine. I play with this gentleman from time to time when he can't find anybody else. He knows I don't have a job, so I'm available. He also has one of the best, if not the best, music podcasts out there. He's been a guest on the show several times. He was on our Oscar special. My brother, Conan Neutron.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Of course.
All the things you said are true, except for the only usage of you because you're unemployed.
Also, I'd like to bring on another friend of mine. We had another music show a while back as I was starting to do more of these live streams. And he was actually on the show back when it was just an audio-only podcast. One of my best friends. He makes me love going to the Southwest. He's given me a special appreciation for true New Mexico cuisine. Pascual Romero. So call me out, guys, if I say his name wrong. He is Pascual. The big black guy that's not here is Pascal. Can't hear you. Uh-oh.
Check. All right. I'm here. I was going to say, too many people with variations of this name. It's weird.
That's a problem for me.
Yeah, that's true.
Now let's bring in the OG of the gang. He's been in the game. How many years has Rick been in the game, Conan?
A lot. I mean, I'll let Rick answer that question. I was listening to Poster Children before I played music. Let's put it that way. Not that much before, but
the Rick Valentin from Poster Children, coming all the way live from Illinois.
Hello. Thanks
and just to round things out, so it's not too many musicians telling musician stories, and to give our conversation some depth, Pascual said, "Hey, I have a friend that's a music journalist. He's a great guy. Alex DeVore."
Hi, can you hear me? Please tell me you can.
Oh, that's so much better.
Oh, you sound great.
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
Did I fix it? Oh my god. I hate to bum you out. I've been a musician for 30 years too. I'm really sorry.
Oh, damn it. Well, you should
But
tell
not
me.
successfully even at all. So don't worry.
Success is a
Alex-
relative term.
Alex and I were actually briefly in a band together, which transcended my participation. But yeah, he's a great guitarist, for the record.
Stop. I'll kill you.
I love you though.
Success is always based on, did you stay at a hotel that had the Svenhards? And that is success. If your hotel had the Svenhards, then it is success.
We had to walk to our shows.
Someone said
Both
they love
ways.
the Futurama
Uphill.
poster. Oh, Alex is a big ass Futurama poster.
You know,
Oh, yeah.
not to already go off on this, but I actually, one of my earliest shows as a musician, we walked to it. We actually rolled our amplifiers onto the college.
I love it.
That's how you earn your stripes, man.
That's just punk. That's punk as fuck.
Yeah.
Did you have Rick? Did you have a 4x12? Or you just like like pushing it?
One of the Ampeg fridges.
Yeah.
No.
Dorm amps, you know, PV, all PV probably.
Oh yeah. That's you're issued a PV when you start playing guitar. I think. Yeah.
So someone says they're hoping for some Bob Dylan talk.
Yeah, sure.
Maybe not tonight. Maybe not tonight. It won't
Hell of a
be for me.
songwriter.
It won't be for me. I got to see Bob Dylan live, and I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, he was playing keyboards when I saw him. So yeah, it wasn't as exciting as I had hoped.
Was he a traveling Wilbury?
He was.
Yeah.
Was he like the Wilbury?
He was not the
No,
ugliest.
he
Wolverine.
He was the traveling part.
He was probably the oldest. Oh no, Roy Orbison was the
Roy
oldest.
Orbison,
Orbison, yeah.
old as shit.
Oh yeah.
Second oldest.
Yeah. That was a.
Jeff Lynne's the baby of the band.
Those are some talented yet harsh-looking men.
Has anyone ever seen Jeff Lynne's eyes? It's just sunglasses.
I found out my cousin is his stylist. I'm not trying.
Jeff Lynne?
Yeah.
Wow.
She had a picture on Facebook of her at like some event that I was like, why are you at this event? It was like Tom Petty thing. She's like, oh, I'm a stylist for a lot of these guys. I was like, no, really? Okay. Like we're the same age. Yeah.
Jeff Lynne.
Totally
Curly.
fucking too.
And you're
Just
talking to
curly.
us instead of curling Jeff Lynne's hair. Yeah.
So enough silly banter.
Sure.
Let's get down to it. I'm terrified to play a show. Has anyone here been to a show since restrictions have been lifted?
No.
Not one that wasn't on my computer. No.
I would not feel comfortable doing that, and I have not.
I went to
Played
a
or
movie
not.
theater in sometime in the past year, and I felt really uncomfortable. But I did that. That's the closest.
Yeah, you're a braver man than me.
Yeah,
I can see that shit at home.
exactly.
And not have to hold in the fart. So I'm like I'm terrified of everything. Are there people in your inner circles that are going to shows or even trying to play shows?
No.
No, I mean New Mexico's like still pretty locked down. You know, I mean we've got a whole color system and we've been really good with the vaccinations, but for the most part, I mean venues just have not done anything yet. So
There's been, you know what? I'm actually over the summer. We have like this big equestrian center here in Santa Fe. That's like it's massive. It's like 10 football fields, and they put on a DJ show where cars were like 20 feet apart, and you had to like stand near your car. And I did go to that for work. But as far as the rest of New Mexico goes, I've seen a few places build some outdoor stages and do limited ticketing, and generally like there's patio, like a dude playing wagon wheel in the corner kind of things. But nobody I know, like I can't imagine going to a theater or somewhere where I had to stand not on a patio near somebody.
Yeah.
What about you, Conan?
Well, I live in the state of Wisconsin now, and the state of Wisconsin, there's all kinds of great and sensible legislation coming from the governor as far as lockdowns, and the legislature overrides it immediately every time. So, especially in Kenosha County, there's been a bunch of shows happening at bars, at least one of which we used to play at, and I used to quite like it because it's had a fun kind of Freak Factor 9 vibe, and they pay well. I will not be playing there anymore because they've been acting very recklessly this entire time, and I don't think it's responsible in any way, shape, or form. And I wouldn't feel comfortable at this point, like playing a show until at bare minimum until the end of summer, at least with the way Wisconsin's going, because the cities are very good with getting vaccinated and being responsible. But the more and more you go out to the quote unquote red areas, you get a lot of freedom lovers.
Rick, what about you? I know you said the movie theater, but
and so our local classic indie rock club, I would say, called the Night Shop, which Conan's played at, shut down and has been shut down since last summer, if not before then. I can't actually remember when they shut down. They've been doing some streaming shows, but completely shut down. Some talk about doing shows outside over the summer, but that hasn't materialized yet or any confirmed dates. I think the big conflict here is that they kind of followed all the rules and did everything right, and there are other, not just music clubs. Well, yeah, some of these places were music clubs that didn't follow the rules and were open, and questions about how getting fined, right? And should these rule breakers, right, scofflaws, get fined, and then should they get COVID relief money and everything like that? So there's a huge conflict that's just kind of among the club owners between the people who did everything right and followed the rules, and then people who didn't, and then making sure that there's some kind of equity at the end of all this, so that the people who actually did everything right don't wind up closing because they are never opening again because they did everything right and then went broke, right? And so that's the big issue here. It's more just, can they open? And yeah, that's basically what's going on.
Someone asked in the chat if we've been able to, if any of us have been able to make ends meet during the pandemic, and someone responded they started podcasts. That's fucking hilarious, because that motherfucking shit literally happened.
The money is podcasting.
So,
that's where the big money is. This indie rock thing. No more. Man,
I went back to the studio in which I lived, and people like Conan actually came there and know about my place very, very well. And it was funny talking to people again and seeing people I haven't seen for some time since I moved out of there. And they're like, "Hey, man, looks like you're doing pretty good with the podcast." I was like, yeah, it's a lot better.
I mean, I can't speak for anyone else, but I haven't made a living, full time as a musician. It's been at least 20 years since I've been able to make a living as a musician. Definitely. Yeah. And when I did, it was a very short window when I could.
And I do want to ask that question to you, Rick, and even Pascual. You guys actually were in bands back when it was a little bit better. The industry was a little bit different. People actually were selling records, making a few dollars selling records. People were actually getting paid off radio plays if you had radio friendly music. When you look at the landscape now, this is just my dark, doomy, Chris Hedges doomy vision of what things are starting to look like. Reading these articles and looking at what people want to do with these opens, they want to open in tiers and they want to have less capacity. Coming from someone that not just as a musician, but also working inside of the music business from a decent level where I was part of a certain level of planning for major festivals, I kind of have an understanding of what bottom lines people want to see, right? And I think there's one thing a lot of people don't understand is that a promoter or a venue don't run everything. So there's a food and beverage company that supplies a lot of money for these festivals and even these venues. The promoter just has to book the talent, and they have to worry about ticket sales. So when I see things say like, well, we're open these venues at 25% capacity, a venue like the Bill Graham in San Francisco, which is an 8,500 seat room, 25% capacity is a major loss for the food and beverage company, and generally it's probably going to be a loss for the promoter / talent buyer. So you're going to have to raise ticket prices, right, to make up whatever you're losing on the attendance that's not there. And then they're talking about having what I'm reading about is tiers. Have you guys seen this too? Like if you're vaccinated and can show proof, you get a certain tier. If you're not vaccinated, but you can show proof of a negative test, we'll shove you over here.
Yeah.
And these tiers kind of feel like a certain level of VIP almost.
Oh yeah.
And that's my fear of what live music's going to look like. Because beside the fact that we're seeing smaller venues shut down, before they were even shutting down, we were seeing these major companies like Live Nation, AEG, Golden Voice come in and start taking over these smaller venues. So they could have control of artists from little 200 seat room to the festival level. And I think that that's going to actually change the way we look at music, because you're also talking about number crunchers that really don't want to listen to anybody new and hot. Who's popular? Who's bringing people in? That's all I care about. Click, yeah.
How could you legally ask people to provide that information, and how could they prove it? That seems weird to me.
It'd have to be voluntary. That's the only
Right.
way you can do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So how badly I want to see Sheryl Crow? Like not even that badly at all.
Well, seriously, like I'm being serious. Who do you think, even if we're talking about a 500 seat room, who's going to come in at 25% capacity in a 500 seat room and justify $100 ticket?
Those weird mid-level folk guys, like the John Gorkas and the Iris Dements and the people who are all of our mothers really love. And I know that I say that sounds really jokey, but I mean it. That's what I think it's going to be.
Jam bandy guys, but seriously, like who is going to be able to justify that ticket price and also justify the now increased price of food and beverage?
Right.
Yeah, I think you're talking about those mid-range artists, but you're kind of talking about what was already happening with the music, the live music industry, which is that idea of VIP. So regardless of that idea of having a section of people who can afford $1,000 ticket or a $2,000 ticket, right, and all those tiers and the backstage passes, like I have relatives where they were going, or actually I was sitting on a train with a bunch of people who are going to see Taylor Swift before all this happened, and they're spending thousands of dollars to bring their daughters to see Taylor Swift at Soldier Field, and then also there's another $1,000 to bring them backstage for the backstage experience and everything like that. So we already have that kind of economy where you have these tiered levels with insane prices, and so all that's going to happen is if that continues to trickle down to like an artist in a 500 seat theater, there's just no profit in that. And so what that means is that those artists, they're not going to be able to fill a place and do shows at all. I think it's just going to be continuing to hollow out that performer middle class that's already been hollowed out, but it's just going to get worse and worse. Rolling Stones, right? You can guarantee that you're going to get people in and paying up if it needs $1,000 a ticket.
20 grand a ticket, yeah.
20 grand a ticket. They can do that, right? It's about who can bring in the rich people sitting in the front 10 rows, and if the whole place is those front 10 rows, you can find 10 rows of people who are willing to pay $20,000 to see the Rolling Stones, right? But they're not going to go see some mid-level artists for that. There's just not enough fans that have that much money for those type of artists.
And another thing, like I'll to give you some perspective, I worked at a festival that you young people called Old Cella, Desert Trip. It was Bob Dylan, the Rolling Stones. What's the guy from Pink Floyd?
Roger Waters.
Roger
Waters.
McCartney.
Sorry, thank you.
Did I say everybody?
Yeah.
Sid Barrett.
Say again?
Nothing.
Sid Barrett.
Sid Barrett.
That'd be worth paying money for.
I'd pay $500 for the ghost of Sid Barrett.
And make sure you get all their names because they need all the press they can get. People need to know about these artists.
Yeah.
Heard about these guys, Paul?
To give you an idea, that show was it sold out for the size it was, right? And so people know the size is always what the promoter says the size is. So if they cut an arena in half and sold out as 3,000, then 3,000 is sold out. But it's at the same place that Coachella is, and they made it a little smaller. So it was about 70,000 people. So about the size of the country festival. What's the country Coachella? Where they say the N word like hello.
Whoa.
Stagecoach. Stagecoach.
Yeah.
I'm pumped. I never heard of that.
Yeah.
Don't be thankful you don't work there. But they made massive amounts of money because of the people that they brought in. Merchandise sold out like super quick for massive amounts of money. They had a vinyl. Well, they said a vinyl store at Coachella, but it was a consuming paradise. And the problem that the promoters were having was, how do they replicate it? Because they literally took pretty much 6 guys that are still alive.
Yeah.
And it's not like you're going to get 6 more still alive guys. So they had tried to do it a few years.
Yeah, they were able to get in and build a name for themselves and build an audience back when it was easier to reach a larger audience. So like it's important to, because that's like I have a lot of beefs with the touring movies that are out. The Dave Grohl one, it kind of falls into that. Oh, there are no more bands left. Like nonsense at the end of it, which is literally just like, okay, great, we're doing that again, huh? And to a certain degree, there is some validity to it in the fact that there isn't that cultural cachet of a Nirvana or something along those lines that touches everyone. There's like everything's like broken up into micro segments of everything. But the old Cella, as you have often referred to it, which always cracks me up, is because those guys all got in. They got in before everything changed, and there's a few of those left from the 90s. And like, okay, good for them. But other than that, it's like real, like weird aberrations, like maybe like a Queens of the Stone Age or like White Stripes or something. Yeah. And that's nothing new. That's not like specific with COVID, but then also we're dealing with a culture that rewards things that people know, right? That's what everything social media is set up in such a way to reward not only things that people already know, but things that are familiar. And that's not an accident. That's what do they say? That's a feature, not a bug, right?
Yeah.
And you had said earlier about, like back in the 90s when people could still make money playing music and everything like that. But my memory of that time is that it was already pretty sparse. And then talking to musicians from the era we're talking about, the 60s and 70s kind of era, people who were local musicians or regional bands, the power and the economy at that time for live music was huge. So you could be a local band or a regional band, like in Illinois, let's say an Illinois band, not on a record label, but you could play live shows and you could make a living, right? and because so many people were going out to live shows, it was huge. And so that idea of the big rock stars from the 60s and 70s, that was true. But then there was a whole economy under that where, you could be a local musician, a regional musician, a musician,
Totally.
obscure musician with a record out, but still obscure.
You traveled it.
Yeah, it would be 100,000 records, which, in the
failure back then.
insane.
Yeah.
And so someone who sold 100,000 records would be considered a failure, right? At that era. And so there was a huge, crazy economy that existed, and that was the baby boomer rock and roll economy, and it's kind of traveled along with that generation. And it's true, all those famous guys right can bring in a huge number of people still, but I don't think there's anyone to replace them, because it's changed. That economy didn't it got different. Like even when I was starting out, it already felt like it was
we're seeing the deindustrialization of the country by the time you're coming out in the 90s, right? And NAFTA. So when you look at, that's why the COVID and the era of COVID to me is very interesting, because for me, COVID was like, for a lot of people, maybe not the people in the chat, maybe not the people on this fucking panel, but for a lot of people, that was a mask off moment for America to understand that the economy was in the shits. And being that I've spent the last 10 years or so traveling around the heartland of this country and seeing the hollowing out of neoliberalism, I definitely have understood it for some time. And when you think about, to Rick's point, that these guys that are put on this great pedestal, part of the reason why they sold so many fucking records, Frampton Comes Alive. That's a monster album, record sales wise.
Yeah.
With 11 million plus record. A lot of people were selling 11 million, 20 million. Fleetwood Mac with 20 million. I think they sell like 10 on the next record, and people say it's a flop. Michael Jackson sells 20, 30 million on Thriller, and Bad sells 11. It's a flop.
Yeah.
To hear these numbers, but we also have to think about where the country was, where the world was at that time financially. And now here we are.
It was a fluke, the 60s, 70s, and then in the 80s, the post-cocaine boom, just America, it just totally fell off. I mean, I know I sound like I'm always joking whenever I say anything, but like that we just got back from World War II, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, just that boom in, horrible people being born who would go on to be Olympic level racists, and the money that came with it. Yeah, they had that kind of money. Even when I was younger, I remember having a little more money than once we got into the early 2000s. And sorry.
Well, but greed plays a role in that too, right?
Sure.
There was a time when we were all younger, and even again, this goes out to people in the chat as well. We could go to a record store, buy shit, browse through, right? Buy shit with cool covers. Everybody here on this panel has bought something because the cover was cool.
Totally.
Yeah, I still do.
Yeah.
And
and for $18,
we could go, okay, these are the things I came in for, and these are the things that have cool covers, or maybe the guy behind the counter that knows what I like pointed me in the right direction.
Yeah.
And then we fast forward to the late 90s, when the greed of the industry, overwhelming, they're like, fuck this, you're about to pay $20 for this shit. Yeah. And you're only going to be able to get at a big box store. We want to be the one-stop shop. Monopoly be damned. You come in here.
I remember that did happen. Like, who was it? Was it U2 that like only sold a record at Walmart at one point or another?
Oh yeah, definitely force fed that shit on my phone.
Oh yeah, I can't even figure out how to get off there. It's just been on there for like 6 years. But yeah, I know that Taylor Swift does that from time to time too. Like, just sells shit at Target. I mean, I guess, does it come down to like you grew up going to shitty warehouse shows that you paid $5 to see horrible punk and metal bands, and you bought their EP for $3? Or did you grow up not having the awesomeness of that world, and you have nothing to have tempered that weird, shitty Walmart, everything is going to be $20, and here's the censored in utero cover, which still pisses me off to this day.
Apparently, Garth Brooks was Walmart only.
Garth Brooks. Okay, well that track.
Of course, it was.
Yeah, U2 was a little late.
What about his alter ego?
Chris
Gaines.
Chris
Yeah.
Gaines, yeah.
The goth.
That one was Target only.
Generation.
I bet he made so much money off that, though.
Oh, certainly. This a thing I've always said about music, and it's tough because like I have sort of the weird I don't know if it's privilege, but it's I've had the weird experience of my life of being a person whose music career started before like the apex of piracy, and labels would give money to people, and like I was paid to just write an album at one point in my life, but you know, a thing I've learned, if you look at the sort of arc of music as a career in the last 100 years, like, and I know it sounds weird to say this, but like nobody owes you a music career, and I don't mean that in the bootstraps kind of douchebaggy conservative way, but I mean that the music industry just does not exist outside of like the last 80 years or so, and it's weird because if you look at like the 50s, that is actually kind of the worst era of music in terms of like people don't own their music. People are just getting paid to perform music. They did okay until they stopped touring, and then they went off to, you know, be car salesmen and stuff. And it's really weird because like the heyday of music like sort of started with the Beatles and then just sort of arced into the 80s and then just started taking a dive in the 90s, and then the digital era like had an industry that didn't know how to deal with a new format, and then all of us just got fucked like simultaneously, because I made a living in music periodically, and it was mostly in spite of the digital era, and it was really frustrating, but at the same time I was like, at least I'm not some douchebag being paid to play bass on a song, you know, for, you know, 60 shows a year or whatever. So I don't know. It's weird. It sucks. And the music industry is just such a fucking, you know, garbage thing, really. And I don't know. I don't know where I'm going with this. That's
a great point. It doesn't even exist. Making it what it is a 20-year period 70 years ago.
Faith No More asked that question. It's it. What is it?
What is
and
it?
like them, you wanted it all, but you couldn't have it.
It's interesting because Pascal and I have gotten to this conversation. I definitely want to get your take on this, Conan, about his take on the 50s. And recently I watched James Brown's docudrama with the late Chadwick Boseman playing James Brown.
I haven't seen that. Good?
It's a decent film. It's a decent film. And you know, there's something to be said about that era, because all those films from that era are telling the story that Pascal is telling you right now, that these guys didn't write the song. You know what I just found out? What's Love got to do with it got released by a Swedish band a year before Tina Turner hit with it because she didn't like it. They gave it to her and she was like, nah, this isn't me. And then the Swedish band drops it and it doesn't hit. They give it to her again. She goes, well, let me funk it up. Let me rock it up. Whatever, you know, I'm a Tina this shit up. And then you get the massive, you know, record that is Private Dancer, right? For her. Her middle finger to Ike Turner. And then but you look at a guy like Ike Turner, who was one of the, sad to say, godfathers of the music that we all play.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Like Rocket 66, right?
Yep.
And he constantly got robbed. And that was a big reason why he was such an asshole. I mean, that's not the only reason. It was an asshole with Tina. Cocaine is a hell of a drug. And, you know, I think he was a bit of a dick, but he talks about it. She says it, that he got fucked over so bad initially that he didn't trust anybody.
Right.
So the 50s and 60s are this era where it's like, oh, it didn't stick for you, maybe it'll stick for you. Didn't stick for you, maybe it'll stick for you. I mean, Motown is modeled after the factory.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and they made that great Motown documentary like 2 years ago or something. It's really very fascinating. Really interesting. If I may, I've got two quick things, and then I'd like to throw it to Rick afterwards because I'm interested in his take on something. First is a factoid because you reminded me of Dolly Parton was originally going to. I think it's she was Elvis was going to record one of her songs. Mm-hmm. I think it was I'll Always Love You, but like at the last minute, Colonel Tom Parker was like, yeah, and we'll take half the writing credits. And she's like, no, you actually won't. And like, he was like the biggest artist in the world at that time. And it was an incredibly smart business decision because obviously that, like she retained all the rights to it in perpetuity. And then when certain other artists covered it and it ended up being like a worldwide hit, it, I mean, that basically paid for Dollywood, so that's just a factoid that I want to throw out there.
But that's insane to think about that she made that much money.
And she was smart, and she doesn't. I mean, she gets credit for certain things of being what she was born with. But she's an incredibly smart businesswoman, and she's actually put a sustainable model together for her when she is going out and playing. That is an incredible support system that I'd liked upon. But we briefly talked about how Napster kind of changed things and downloads and all that. I was still touring like right before that, so we're talking CD era, and. One interesting thing about, and that was Replicator, and that was the kind of band that we would play these different cities. We'd never been to, nobody knew who they were, but they would see this band like, oh my God, that was great, or that was crazy, that was weird. I better buy this CD right now because I will never ever hear anything about the band ever again or ever be able to find it. Like that was like the motivation that like you would sell CDs because it wasn't instantly available. Oh, let me just okay, it's on Spotify. I got the whole discography now, like whatever. That wasn't even a thing that was possible. And that's an interesting time in music that before it changed again completely, that doesn't get talked about too often. But I really, really, really would like to hear what Rick's take on some of this stuff is because, Poster Children were on, what was it, Warner Brothers, right? And you guys were around during the Gold Rush. And then after the Gold Rush, yeah, really young for you.
Well, yeah, and to go back to just the idea of, I think the past 100 years of the music business, right? Once music became a physical commodity, right? Sheet music, and then continuing on to cylinders and records and everything like that, is I think the common thread that you see in all this is that the musicians themselves, the artists, for the most part, did not get a huge chunk of that money, right? And so that's a constant. You have stars that break out or get, a lot of money, and especially in the 60s and 70s. But for the most part, the music industry, as it's operated, does not work to enrich musicians for the most part, right? But I mean, in my mind, that 60s and 70s peak was a peak, and then it was kind of hidden once, the generational shift, and you have Gen X, my generation, buying records. But also in the 60s and 70s, I think rock and roll, right, records were the main conduit for that generation to get its information and its culture, right? And then even by the time I was participating in music culture, it was indie rock. There was an underground part for my generation, the indie scene, that was operating underneath that whole system that had been built for the 60s for the baby boomers. And so in my mind, it was already dying, in terms of generational, as a sort of main conduit for culture for my generation. We were as much interested in comic books, right, and film, independent film, I guess you could say, but also just film. And then as online culture started moving in, and video games, right? So all of that competing, and so I think what you were seeing is just a change where music, and especially rock music, was no longer the one sort of touch point or centerpiece of the younger generation's culture. And so it was already dying. CDs, were kind of this false promise and a huge amount of wealth, but a lot of it was reissues. And also what you were talking about, it's like all of a sudden it's $20. It's like $1 or less of plastic that you can sell for $20. That's a $19 profit margin, which also helped, independent musicians.
Yeah.
Kind of, you could make a CD, right? Which you could at a certain point, it was easy. You could sell 3 CDs at a show and you'd have gas money, right?
Mm-hmm.
And once that died out, I think it was just kind of like a false economy. And then once we moved into digital, it was like, oh, wait a minute, this scene or this type of music or this type of experience, seeing live music in a small club or even in a larger place, it's not as important to newer generations. And you're just seeing that cliff happen. That was going to happen anyways. And now the economy's fallen out of everything else, right? It's not just music, right?
It's interesting that you bring that up. I'm sorry. I got distracted by the chat. Pascual, you look like you wanted to respond to that.
Yeah, no, I saw. Well, I mean, to sort of backpedal a little, I saw in the chat that like someone had questioned like, does the industry owe us a career? And that was it's. I mean, it's really complex. I think that the industry, quote unquote, does not owe anything to anyone, but the idea of music as a career in the modern world is sort of it's sort of a self-limiting kind of window that really only existed for a small time, because like you go back to the early days of music and it was a gig economy, and it really was not about, like, artists did not make the money that people think they did. It wasn't until the singer-songwriter era that like bands like the Beatles and stuff like owned their music and owned the publishing. And then like by the 80s,
allegedly why Sam Cooke is dead, right?
Yeah. Oh boy,
He
yeah.
owns those Rolling Stones songs.
Yeah. But you get into like the modern era, and like when you really like put it on in perspective, it's a very short time that artists really well and truly owned, their income and how they generated their living. And so by the time, and it's weird, as a guy who started, in my career started in an era where labels would pay us to write albums. I was at one point in my life paid to write an album. Like I got a bunch of money per month to just put music out. But also
that first Screwdriver record, right?
Yeah. Ooh.
I'm sorry. I'm kidding.
No, it's a deep cut. He cut. That's a deep cut, Alex. It's a long story, but like my Wikipedia got vandalized and said that I was a member of Screwdriver at one point. It's really weird. But as my career kind of went on through the 2000s, it was like, okay, like we own our publishing, but then like what is publishing, and then like what is moving product, and then like I realized, okay, we're making more money on t-shirts than we are on albums, and we're making more money showing up to shows and getting guarantees than we are like our cut of the record, and so like it's really difficult to sort of pinpoint where music as a living did exist, but it's sort of a short window because Jason, you and I talked about it. I was saying like people like Mozart and stuff, like those like famous composers and stuff, like their living in their day was like aristocrats paying them to sit in a room, and like we we don't exist in that world, and unfortunately that world is sort of kind of coming back, because I'm positive people like Martin, the pharma bro dude who bought the Wu-Tang. Yeah, like they'll pay bands to just play in a room, and that's, I guess, cool, but like people like us who've been blue collar just can't do it.
No, and best believe there's cats that right now during COVID are getting paid six figures to show up to Sarah's bar mitzvah and
Dave
fucking
Everlong at somebody's.
Dave Grohl was playing the fuck out of Everlong at
fucking Vanilla Ice at the fucking Trump's fucking hotel in Florida, dude.
Best believe that shit is happening. And what people are some people had commented about, like, don't let just tech bros be the only ones that play music. Teray Reed and I actually talk about this a lot, which is when we talk about these old black funk bands and like black guitar players, when you look at their roots, they all had music in school. They learned how to play instruments in school, in public school. I worked and lived inside of a music rehearsal place in Oakland that was the music rehearsal place in Oakland. And I'll tell you what, wasn't a lot of young kids coming in there with fucking instruments.
Well, no, they're cutting it, right? It's always the first thing to go. If I could touch on the entitled, do musicians deserve to make a living? I don't think anybody's entitled to any kind of artistic career. Like if you're terrible and you pick up a guitar, like, if you luck out, that's great. But I do think these venues, I agree, promoters, labels need to pay people better once they are doing that. Like we've all had the venues who are like, oh, do you want to come and play here? Do you think that would be cool? It'd be cool to play here and we'll give you $50 and people maybe will know who you are. I think people are entitled to be paid once they're doing it, but maybe not just to an automatic music career, if that makes sense.
I mean, look, I don't know how I feel about that. What do you feel about that, Conan?
Well, I was just going to say that, I found that kind of thing, I don't know how a young artist would be able to work that out. Like, I'm able to work out guarantees and stuff for what I do because I have, 20 plus year relationship of never having stopped touring and have these relationships all around the US. And even then there's always like, new territory where it's like, they don't know you. No one else knows you. Maybe a few people will show up, but they're not going to give you even a modicum of like a guarantee that you can just keep the wheels moving forward for that. But then it's interesting because, like, speaking to the point before, it's gone from patronage to Patreon, right? Like there are these other models that like.
Write that book, Conan.
No, you're right.
Right? Yeah.
No, you're right. Part of the reason why we were doing this podcast, and I think I told you this was something that we were going to do. When we weren't touring, that was the only thing that I was thinking to do. Like, let's do this thing where we're not touring and we can create some content. We can interview people because we fucking live here in this space. And
that's how Protonic Reversal started too. And I think that's how Radio Zero started, right, Rick?
Yeah. There's downtime.
This is what we do. You are getting an inside look of what really goes on backstage.
And it's sad for everybody.
It's everybody
a bunch of dudes. Yeah. Half of which are married. Talking about in my day.
In 2001, when MySpace became popular.
Remember after I set up my top everything?
Like, but it's when someone made the comment about don't let tech bros be the only people playing music, like there's a reality that a lot of those cats, especially in the Bay Area, were keeping practice spaces alive.
Yeah.
Because like people have been talking about, rents are high. Especially again, post-COVID. We all know people that have sold some shit that you just can't buy again. I'm blessed to be in the situation I'm in right now that I didn't have to sell my JCM 800. But best believe I thought about, man, I could sell this and that's a couple car payments.
That's how I got one this year, an 800.
Right?
And it's
other people's misery is your value.
But that's where it is right now. And I do think when things open up you're going to see, and this comes from the festival side too. When Beyonce did Coachella, it did crazy record numbers. Crazy record numbers. So much so they were like, next year, let's open up across the street as well. Because we have this space. Let's just do that. Because these people like Beyonce. But they had a lot to do with the bill. And she had a year to promote it because I think she lied about the pregnancy, whatever. So
she's a 360 artist too. She isn't just an artist. She's got like all these other hands like tied up in development and
these sponsorships.
And these sweatshops that I just read about this week. The Sri Lankan.
Oh, really? Where stuff was getting made?
For clothes, 64 cents an hour or something. These women and children are making.
And she doesn't know. I'm not saying she doesn't have any responsibility. She doesn't know. But the following year is a 20% decline in sales, in revenue, across the board. And all that stuff changes the way people book music.
Sure.
There's a reason why cats don't like all ages shows. All ages shows mean people can't drink. Everybody makes money from the bar. And when you have talent that comes in that only attracts 13-year-olds, you don't give a shit if the place is sold out with 13-year-olds. You took a loss that night. You know how many 13-year-old sellouts I've seen and seen people pissed off? EDC is the biggest festival in North America. It's $175,000. So there's 175,000 people a day. It does nowhere near Coachella numbers, and that's 120,000 people when it's packed.
Yeah, I feel like all of that is like all of that's like light years away from anything that I am involved with, and I like hearing the stories for sure. But I mean, I think that's another universe for me, and I'm seeing that as someone that I'm lucky enough that. And I guess work hard enough that what I do, the band is like not only sustainable, but like makes some money. Not like I can live off of it money, but it brings more money in than it goes out. But that's because I'm constantly working, constantly putting out new stuff, new T-shirts, like whatever it is. And there's other models to it. I mean, when I mentioned the Patreon thing, Creston Spires from Harvey Milk does like a monthly thing where you subscribe to his Patreon and you get like a new song every month. For me, that sounds terrible. I would never do that. Like that's not how I roll. That sounds horrible. But like,
it's get worse and worse.
I've seen a lot of rappers doing that. I mean, somebody said America is Fry Fest forever. Pascual and I. Now I'm so fucked up with the names now. I'm saying everything's horribly wrong.
We're gonna have to, you, me, and Pascal are gonna be on it. Get back to your microphone, dude. We're gonna do an episode with Pascal, and you're just gonna fucking code switch the entire fucking. It'll be cool. No, but we had that conversation about Fire
Fest is the future.
Yeah, I mean that's what's gonna happen. It's boutique like experiential fucking shows, and I don't want that personally, but like that in this post-COVID world, it's catering to that, and I don't know how to fix that, but we're going that direction for sure.
I don't even want more than 2 bands on the bill at this point in my oldness. Like,
Alex, you're right, dude.
There's somebody else playing, huh?
Especially on a Monday.
Especially on a Monday, yeah. I have friends who are, I'm going to go on at 11 o'clock, and I'm like, at night, forget it.
At night. Where
can I send $10? I'll buy you a t-shirt. Please don't make me put my shoes back on.
Conan, I see this as going down though. I'm talking about it from the level of major festivals because I see this as affecting everybody. It's affecting not just major artists that they are outside of our sphere, but it's also going to affect the small clubs as well. It's the same mentality. Small clubs equally hate all ages shows. The rickshaw stop fucking hates DJ night because nobody's drinking.
Yeah.
They're not making that much money from the door.
Well, the
I'm
band's
curious-
a vehicle for alcohol sales. Yeah, I mean that's been the case for a very long time, and that's been the model. And is that going to be the model going forward in a post-COVID society? I don't know. You know, like
I think the model's going to look. I think it's going to look super VIP-esque, even for small clubs. Because how can small club X afford to stay open?
Right. So you're talking about the stratification of like, these are the folks that got their vaccine cards. These are the folks that like took the test, et cetera, et cetera. And I think you'll see that. But I think what you also see is a re-rising of DIY venues, of cafes, and people like throwing shows like for the heck of it. Or not for the heck of it, but because, coming from the DIY world, like from like Fugazi school and method of doing things. And I think we'll actually see a reasonable uptick on that. But again, in the same way everything is now, where it's a subcategory of a subcategory of a subcategory, that like it's not going to be on some massive fundamental level. But I will see more of that simply because, as you said, if you have a venue at 25% capacity, I mean, you're not going to make any money. You'll be lucky if you break even if you're running a venue.
We'll do it for your. I mean, I came up through like a nonprofit, very like punk rock DIY teen arts center where they just threw all of us in literally a dilapidated old warehouse and said, "Figure it out, punk kids." And I wound up working there many years later, and we would get kids who got like sentenced to us for community service. They'd run a red light or they'd catch them with weed or something, and they'd come in and I'd say, "Okay, so for your hours, we can either." I'll teach you how to put together a show, like a punk show, and we'll do that, or you can mop the floor. And they'd say, "Oh, I'd rather just like mop the floor and look at YouTube on my phone." And for like years this happened. I'm hoping that post-pandemic, and I eventually left that job because it was just, I mean, it was the kind of place that you could show up to any day a week and know that like 100 people were going to be there putting together a punk show or a ska show or a metal show or an indie show. I'm hoping that with the remote learning, the remote lessons, the fucking Zoom shows with like, your dumb friend who plays acoustic guitar and it's the same one every time. Maybe some young folks will be sick to death of looking at their screens, and maybe they will start pissed off hip hop groups and punk bands who say like, "This last year was fucking horrible for me and I had so many feelings about it." And then hopefully people, our age and caliber will say, "God, I would love to help you do that in places." And
I mean, I would like that too. I want to say shout out, thanks Bryce for the super chat. We definitely appreciate it. What does Europe get right about their music concert industry model that the U.S. doesn't when it comes to independent under the radar artists? They fund the arts a lot differently in Europe, especially the Scandinavian countries. It's all, and from touring over there, I think all of us have probably toured over there at some point. It's just a different world when it comes to shit. Just every venue I played had a backline of gear for me to use, and it's like that's just what you do there. So
it's worth noting that the U.S. like comparatively, and this is a thing that not to make excuses or anything, but the U.S. is functionally a continent with 50 countries, and so you have to like, you can't compare the U.S. to Germany. You have to compare Texas to Germany. You have to compare 1/50th of the U.S. to every country in the rest of the world, because we're a giant geographic space, and everywhere you go in the U.S. is like radically different. So what Europe gets right is that, it's Europe and the countries are relatively independent of each other. US, the states are sort of independent, but also very fused by the federal government. And it's excruciatingly difficult to compare the US to a country. You have to compare states to countries here, and for better or worse, I don't know. I'm not trying to make excuses for our country, but it kind of is the way it is here.
I think that's a good point. I've been given the backline in a few states, not in Texas, but
I mean, can you, like, when Rick was talking, I think we weren't recording yet. Rick was mentioning that his first show, he had to roll in they walked to the show and
Right.
they rolled in the speaker cabinets. Like that's a reality for a lot of people. Like, trying to play a show in New York City when you've never.
Well, I was going to bring New York up. Yeah. Because New York does do backline. That's kind of been a pain point for me a lot of times with most tours, because I like using stuff that I know that works. You know, the stuff that I know how it's going to sound like. That's more important to me than like the convenience of, oh, I don't own a car and I take the subway to the show. You know, that kind of thing. But that said, sometimes if you do live, you know, if you're in a band in New York, obviously it doesn't make sense to have a van. You're not gonna have an Econoline and be trucking things over to Queens or whatever.
Have fun parking that shit in Manhattan.
Yeah.
Some dumbass show in Manhattan.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, not to be overly negative, but I just don't necessarily see the kind of small independent community music scenes that were, you know, my bread and butter and which changed my life. I don't necessarily see those making a huge comeback. And so, you know, what Conan said, I think we're talking about two different worlds. Like in the van, we used to divide it up into music haters and music lovers. And so there's always a certain percentage of people who are absolutely obsessed and love music, and they usually wind up playing music and they come out to shows. And then what we would call the music haters, who are people who are kind of consuming music on that huge kind of pop culture level. And I don't think the kind of experience that I love is going to go away, but I'm starting to feel like a jazz musician, right?
God, no.
And I don't think that's a bad thing. And I'm starting to feel like, yeah, that's kind of what a record store is too. You know, vinyl is popular, but it's more of this kind of, it's kind of like a bookstore, right? And
They're like artifacts.
yeah, and there are people who love it, and you can make a living maybe within that little tiny subculture, but it's not going to be mainstream culture. Music is still going to be mainstream, and there's going to be a mainstream music culture, but it's going to be completely alien. Like you said, Conan, it's not my world. I don't think I've been to a festival. I haven't been to an arena show, but I haven't been to a festival that I wasn't involved in some way performing. You know, I don't like that experience, but that's the experience that a lot of people like, and that's what they want their music experience to me, which is kind of,
that's changing. Like, I think this is changing for the artist as well as the consumer, because you have a hollowing out of the urban areas and the inner cities for the last few years, with tearing down warehouses and blowing them out and building live work lofts or just urban loft living. So where is the warehouse show going to be, especially in a place like Oakland, California, where I live? And Conan, you know about the ghost ship fire. When the ghost ship fire happened, for those who don't know, there was a kind of an artist community in this real fucked up warehouse. They threw a show. Wiring was horrible. And the thing caught on fire. Of course, there was no exits. And 30 or 40 people died in the fire that were just at a fucking show. So when that happened, the city, of course, like all cities do, cracked the fuck down. And where I was living, we got a whole new bunch of people that came in because they got kicked out of the places they were living in that weren't even the same type of place. It wasn't a place that was having shows. It was like, well, this warehouse is a little too sketchy, and we see you living here under the radar because you're doing this artist shit. So you bitches got to get the fuck out. So a lot of people had to get the fuck out of Oakland. And we saw it with San Francisco in the early 2000s too, as people were getting priced out of the city. They moved to Oakland. Now they're getting priced out of Oakland. So where are all these artists going? Where is this community going to happen? I'm not saying it doesn't exist. Of course it's going to exist in some capacity, but I don't know to what level it's going to exist in, because we don't know what these crackdowns are going to look like in the post-COVID era.
That was really nationwide after the ghost ship thing.
Yeah.
Rhinoceropolis in Denver got hit really hard. Some places in Santa Fe. We had some musician friends out here, actually, Pascual, in Santa Fe. There were some New Mexico people who had died in the ghost ship fire. And it was really horrible to see communities immediately turning on these DIY spaces where it was, you know, not even necessarily just young people, just like punk people trying to make art in the only last place they could do it. Luckily, that kind of went by the wayside. But, you know, even I won't get into a whole thing about like Meow Wolf and my issues with that. But like we're even seeing that the spirit of DIY punk rock warehouses being co-opted by former punks who realize like I want to own 2 or 3 houses. And they are getting pushed out of Oakland. And Pascual will tell you his family got pushed out of fucking Santa Fe, and we're not even Oakland.
Yeah.
No, it's
If-
interesting. Go ahead.
I was gonna say just if I may. My friend Kiyome was one of the people that was killed in the ghost ship fire, and the only reason the crackdown in Oakland specifically wasn't as bad as it could have been, and it was bad, is because myself and a bunch of other people just like me went to the Oakland City Council, and we counteracted all the nonsense and all the excuse making policy, basically to drive out people that aren't making them money. We were there and actively fighting that for weeks. Went to city council meetings. Like, they were like, who are all these people showing up at these city council meetings? And a lot of it was other folks such as myself and new people in the ghost ship fire. The only reason it wasn't as bad in Oakland as it was is because we were actively working on it. And earlier on, Jason, you mentioned something. You were talking about one of the shows, and you're talking about, such and such with the consumers. Well, that's just it. The idea that we're talking about like music fans as consumers, like the change over to that. I think that's incredibly important to think about. But going back to the ghost ship thing, that's just a larger point of why did I move from Oakland? Cost of living. It wasn't because I didn't like living in Oakland anymore. It's because I was every day fighting as hard as I could just to keep my head above water. And that's the case with a lot of musicians. A lot of musicians have left the Bay Area. They've left other areas. And it isn't because people don't like big cities or anything along those lines. It's because it's unsustainable. And it's sort of like, okay, if you're, hey, I get to play music, but like, I don't get to do literally anything else. And I'm constantly, one step ahead of the spider and like the reapers at the door. Great. Sounds awesome. Sign me up. Let's go play some tunes.
Yeah.
I just, as somebody who like came up through spaces like Ghost Ship, honestly, sincerely, I respect so much that you guys, not you guys, but the people went and fought for spaces like that. I just think it's really cool.
Yeah. Thanks. It was important.
I mean, people still, I'm not saying nothing happened. I mean, there still was a crackdown. People still got booted out of certain spaces, especially in East Oakland, especially in West Oakland. Like, that shit did happen.
Yeah.
It could have been worse. Yeah, they didn't come after where we were. We were waiting. We were waiting for them to fucking knock on the door and come after us. And,
well, it's tough because
marshals are watching this.
as Alex pointed out, my experience in my hometown was, getting priced out of the town I grew up in, and it's tough because like these, and it's not just, I mean, Ghost Ship was a great excuse to sort of force art out of spaces, but I like, for me it was weird because Alex pointed it out. I had to leave my hometown of Santa Fe, where Jason, you and I met. In fact, we were
in Santa Fe.
We booked you
Evangelos.
Yeah. And
where did they play, Pascual?
What's that?
Where did they play here?
Evangelos, in the underground. So we booked Jason at his first show in Santa Fe at Evangelos in the underground. I was still living in Santa Fe at the time, but that was I think my son Felix was very young at the time, and we lived in the rail yard. I grew up just a couple blocks from Evangelos on West San Francisco Street. We got priced out of that neighborhood when I was a teenager. My grandpa couldn't pay the property taxes. It was just got too expensive. A house that my family owned since the 1800s. So it was like a real weird, like forced out situation. And then, by the time I met Jason, I lived in the rail yard, which at the time was kind of a cheap neighborhood, but it was getting blown up. And then by the time my kids were school age, we had to move. And so we're in Albuquerque, which is also getting like super blown up. Thankfully, we own our house, but it's like, I don't like, where do I go? I went to LA when I was 20, got priced out of Echo Park, went to the Valley.
I keep moving into these neighborhoods like right behind you, which I realize as a white guy is the fucking worst.
It's interesting because again, my thing is we're an ecosystem. Us as musicians, of course, the people that are buying and listening to the music. And what happens when both people can't afford to make it, and then the people that are used to going to see you and buying your shit can't afford to buy it? What then is left? What then comes in? And to me, you get Austin.
Yeah.
You know, go to Austin and tell me about what you see in Austin, and look at the complaints people are having. They're calling the cops on people that have been there for generations, doing what they've been doing for fucking generations when it comes to car shows and live music and everything else like that. That's kind of a scary thing. But before we go,
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Alex.
Oh, it's just like Conan said at the beginning. In another 20 years, who are going to be the guys playing old cello, or the musicians, not the guys? Sorry, who are we going to even have if everybody
not going to exist? Yeah, that's
Metallica.
They're still alive somehow.
And just
I guess Metallica or Gen X, sure.
Yeah, sure. At least they have a brown guy.
So two things. First of all, one of the last shows that I played on tour before COVID hit was actually in Austin, and it was downtown. That venue isn't around anymore now. That actually closed down about 4 months into the pandemic, and it was almost unrecognizable to me. And it always was sort of like that was the kind of the bougie area. It's sort of like that's where South by Southwest happens, all that. Okay, fine. It was like, oh, this is gentrified. Like it was a big freaking deal. The other thing, and I have no way to not just wedge this into the conversation, but about 1 million years ago, someone touched on NFTs. Rick is the only one I know who's released NFT. And I would really love to hear about that before we have to go.
No, what?
I wanted to wrap the show up with the NFT question. God damn it, Conan. I'm the host here. You host your own show.
Sorry.
I'll go on your show and host shit. How do you like that?
My
bad. Rick, NFTs.
In 1 minute, right? You want me to?
You got time.
Well, what do you want to know? I mean, yeah, I minted a bunch of NFTs, but more specifically, it's 100 compositions, or arrangements of a song. So I, put together a song and then added some sort of random elements into it so that I could generate 100 variations of it.
Mm-hmm.
And then I also created artwork that linked to each of those unique versions of the songs. And yeah, they're each an NFT that's available, to purchase. And so it's where I don't know where to start. I mean, people usually have questions about that. They have
like, what the fuck is it? Can you explain really quickly what it is?
Yeah, I liken it to it's a digital symbol of ownership, right? So it's kind of like saying, hey, I was here. Hey, I own this, kind of a status symbol almost, like in the same way you buy a limited edition vinyl, right? And you can say, hey, I have this shellac album that has my name on it. They only put out this record to a certain group of people with their friends' names, right? And those are the only people who got it. And so I can hold up that record and say, hey, this is what I have. And NFTs in a weird way are a digital version of that, as I was here first, or I own that. But for me, in a more kind of direct way, as a musician, I'm interested in blockchain, not the currencies associated with it so much, just the idea of having a traceable record of ownership, so that when you create something, especially in this digital world, and somebody samples you songwriting credits, we talked about the 1950s, all that kind of stuff, right? So, the Willie Dixon, Led Zeppelin kind of issue, right? Where it's like you've got somebody who's living in a small house in Chicago and somebody who's living in a mansion, a castle in England. And, that there's a disparity. Someone has stolen, someone else's music and made a huge amount of money off of it. and there's there was no kind of legal way until the 1980s for the original author to get money, right? Whereas if you have blockchain technology, would allow a traceability for all of that, where it's like, oh, somebody's it's just a really great way to trace ownership, but then also I think it's a good way to kind of help out musicians. And when YouTube says, oh, we didn't know that you worked on this song, and we're not going to give you money if you actually have a digital watermark that goes through a composition and recompositions and reading, everything like that. It's all traceable. And that means this idea of kind of like digital subsistence farming, which is what I call it, which everyone's going to be doing, where it's just you're kind of cobbling everything together, the gig economy. If you're getting little bits of income from the creative stuff you've done, not just music, but artwork, right, in this digital world, that'll be helpful, at least. I don't think it's a sustainable economy, but well, maybe it is, but we should be a part of it as artists. It just kind of went off on a total.
No. The whole thing is fascinating. There is a super chat that definitely involves good friend Conan Neutron. I see 4 dudes in t-shirts and Mr. Neutron like a solar flare, killing it with the shimmering threads. Jason, please buy this gentleman a macchiato.
I have a collared shirt. I'll have you.
This is just
Professor Rick Valentin.
I wore this t-shirt on purpose, for the record. It says, have a day. Can you
I will have a day.
Yeah. Please have a day.
I talk to you guys and it makes me sad. It makes me sad sometimes talking to you guys because I'm so used to planning a tour around seeing you guys and then trying to hang out with you guys, or at least crashing with you guys. So these shows always make me excited and angry and happy, and then excited and angry and happy again. So I'm glad people got to see this show. I'm glad I got to have this show. Thank you guys very much for taking the time to come on and talk with me. Rick, do you want to? Do you have a link to the NFTs, or are they all sold out?
Not all sold out. No, not at all. You can go to tedium.us. There's a link to all that. TEDIUM.us. Yeah.
Okay.
And it's you have a great explainer about exactly what the hell NFT is too, which I appreciate.
Yeah, much better than I can just wing. The video does a better job. Video Rick is much more coherent than improvising Rick.
But you're saying they can't be funged.
Well, fungible, non-fungible means unique, and so that's the problem. Is a lot of people are doing things where they tie it to music, and it's like, oh, you get a record and you buy an NFT, and so you're buying some kind of digital representation, but you're just getting a identical record that 100 other people or 1,000 other people are getting, or an audio track, and that to me is not what it's about. It's about unique artwork. And that's where it gets deeper into, I think it's exploring, ideas that conceptual art was working through in the 1970s. It's much more fascinating on a kind of conceptual art level, but also, music can be tied to it. And so that's why I love it. It's definitely calls into question the idea of ownership, and then why do you even buy things in the first place? Why do you buy art, right? Yeah. And like people say, well, why am I buying an NFT? It's not real. And then it's like, well, you buy concert tickets, right? And you have an experience, or you buy collectible vinyl, but what is the value of that? And why are you buying it? And it's like, I buy a lot of limited edition vinyl, but I'm not buying it as an investment. I'm buying it because I want to help the artist. Right. Yeah. That's most of the time. It's that I love the artist, and I feel like that's a way I can directly give them money. And I think that's what's being missed now, because the fad and the craziness, $69 million for, a bunch of images, or $7 million for a pipe smoking alien cartoon, it kind of that's happens with contemporary art. Right. So there are people who buy artwork for hundreds of millions of dollars, but there are hundreds of millions of artists who are making art on a small scale, and they have people supporting them. And so if we're going to have this digital economy, it's not going to be it shouldn't just be about the people who are, again, the Beyoncés, right? It shouldn't just be about that. It should be about the people who are making art. And maybe they're not making a living at it, but they're creating, and you want to support them or you want to help them make a living, right? And so that to me is what's important about it, because it does seem like it's going to be a future element of our creative economy. And just like our current creative economies or the historical creative economies, there's a huge disparity. There's the majority of artists who don't make a living, but they, you want to help them and you want to support them. And then there's the huge superstars. And so, yeah, that's why I'm interested, is because I want to make sure that at least the all those people operating on that lower level at least are involved in this process before it turns into just, Amazon or something, right?
Yeah.
What is it? The prosperous few and the restless many? Is that the name of that Chomsky chapbook? Yeah.
Yep. I want to call out Jeremy S said, can we talk about guitar pedals next time?
I got a bunch of them right here.
Just use the metal zone, you'll be fine.
Heard of the DS1, you guys?
No.
I want to call out, so Alex and I are good buddies in real life. Alex is in a band called Fibber, who is an incredible punk band. They're the best. I jammed with them for a minute, like back in the day. They're a great band. Please find them on the social medias. But yeah, Metal Zone. Yeah, pedals. You want to talk pedals? Just buy a Metal Zone. You'll be fine. It's fine. It's good. You're good.
Mids, more mids. If you want to talk about tone.
No,
I saw dude. I was in Monroe, Louisiana. I will never forget this. I was in Monroe, Louisiana, playing a show back in the Fin days, and a dude had a Metal Zone running through a dual rectifier, and it sounded horrible.
Shocking.
No, you mean it sounded amazing.
Bees operating a chainsaw.
11.
Just a can of bees the whole way down.
I was like, what did you do? I was like, no. I wanted to stop the show and be like, check it, homie. I know in your room at 2, this probably sounds killer. But in real life, it's not.
Wait, it was a triple or a double? A double.
It was a dual rec with a Metal Zone in front of it. And he would hit that bitch and the sound would just go like this.
Nice.
Hiss all the way down.
The clean. Loud clean to the.
I was like, is that a combo up there? What the fuck are you playing?
I like my guitar tone so thin it can slice cheese.
Yeah. Fuck the mids, man.
I do use a DS1. Just saying.
I gotta stop the show before it goes total into a gear talk. But goddamn, I'm just thinking about that night, and I couldn't stop laughing. I remember talking to Cindy. I was like, "Do you understand what this motherfucker is doing on stage?" Sorry,
that guy needs an intervention.
Fucked me up that night.
I love those moments, and they're like, "Just calm down," and you're like, "I can't, and I won't."
Yeah, like, no, I always wanted that head, and he's fucking it up.
It's just a pedal. No, it's not.
No, it's not. Yep.
It's a statement. Slap in the face of good taste.
Wait, what was the guitar? Some kind of like a Jackson, a BC.
I don't remember that's the thing. I couldn't even remember the guitar. I remember the dude. It was a tall white dude with some baggy ass pants, and I just remember
Ibanez.
He probably had an Ibanez.
It's an Ibanez. It's always an Ibanez. Yeah.
But I was in a city that wasn't a very rich city, so to see somebody with a real nice dual rec, half stack setup, I'm like, oh wow, okay, that's some serious motherfucker that came in here. You spent 3 racks on this, and then you gonna put that shit in front of it like that? Why don't you just piss on $3,000? Just piss on it in front of everybody. Yeah.
Going down the rabbit hole tonight, man.
So Bandcamp Friday is coming up this Friday. If you want to support artists, that's a good day to do it.
Yeah.
I should release this. I have a project, Conan. It's been mixed and mastered, and Mike Cobra even made the artwork for it, and I just haven't released it.
Friday,
Right.
man. I mean, that on I'm presenting this as like a way to just aggressively change the topic, but
Yeah.
it is a beautiful thing. The Bandcamp Friday things have been wonderful, and I mean, I can't speak for everyone else, but it's definitely like helped keep the ship afloat over the course of this last year. And actually, as a service, Bandcamp is so far and above beyond all the other ones. It's
Yeah.
not even the same thing.
They're the best. They're the best.
I would say if you guys are going to buy music from an artist at this level, definitely buy it from Bandcamp.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
You're actually buying music from an artist, whereas
Yeah. You're not like cutting him into a percentage of
Sharecropping.
the fucking
They're sharecropping.
This
They're
sound
pressing
like a
vinyl
joke. It'll sound like a joke. If you have musician friends, just give them $10 for nothing in return. And I mean that seriously.
Yeah, no, dude, absolutely, man.
All right,
He's saying
thank
give
you
all of
guys.
us $10 for no reason.
That's
That's what he's saying.
That's literally what I'm
Don't
saying.
send me $10. Send them. I don't even want to play music anymore. Fuck music, but give them money.
That's what the industry did to Pascual.
It's been a
his name,
long, hard road, man.
That's his name, right? Yeah. Every time it was so sad. Okay, we'll talk about this off air. All right, thank you guys for watching the show. We're not going to do a bonus because there's no Pascual, but we will be back Thursday with Milton Alamati, and we're going to talk about. We'll be back more on what you guys are used to hearing. We're going to talk about China's role in Africa. Is China colonizing Africa? Is this a bad thing? The Belt and Road. We've talked about it before from more of a Chinese perspective. We're going to have Milton Alamati on to give us more of the African perspective, and we're also going to get into Africom a little bit. So we'll see you Thursday. And we are out.
Ha 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 ha.